Afrocentrism, the movement, was actually a good movement, and it was to right the wrongs done by the Eurocentrists after a long, long time. But almost immediately, the people who termed themselves Afrocentrists found themselves regretting that word simply because it was used as a shorthand to dismiss their information. These days, we have tons and tons and tons of people who use this word offhandedly to try and dismiss the information. Now, I will say, first and foremost, not all people who are Afrocentrists are the wild, crazy ones who say things like, Japan was black until the 1700s or something like that. It's not crazy people town. Afrocentrism is not about crazy people, it's about real movements. But we have to curtail this word. We have to kind of put this word in a bank, not because it's a bad word, but because it has been turned into a bad word and a shorthand to dismiss the information. And anyone who uses that word against somebody is clearly bootloading to their evidence or to their audience that these people that I'm about to talk about are stupid. A good example for this would be the word conspiracy theorist. If, let's say, for example, someone like Edward Snowden came and was talking, and I said, known conspiracy theorist Edward Snowden is about to address you guys, what I'm putting in there is, hey, here's someone stupid who's about to tell you something based on nonsense that he made up. And you will see that this will be the case in this video that I'm about to watch.
Hello everyone, it's Jabari here, and first to warn you guys ahead of time, this is gonna be somewhat, not completely, but somewhat of a rant video. If you're new to my channel, welcome, and I really hope you enjoy my content. If you are a regular, you probably already know that my agenda with this channel is to spread knowledge of the ignored, neglected, and misunderstood aspects of black culture and history. Not just to black people, but to everyone of every race and from every part of the world. However, there tends to be a toxic trend among many black African enthusiasts, or afrocentrists, trying to assert outrageous claims towards our people and our history. Unfortunately, comments like these tend to find a home in my comment section every day. These comments do more harm than good, and just make the world and our own people have even less respect for our culture and history, and make channels like mine, which actually bear factual information, less credible.
So let me first state what I agree with. I agree that people who state extremely extreme things about black African culture and trying to make everybody in the world black are poisoning the arguments. But this is not an accident. It's not an accident. There are a lot of Europeans whose history or their vision of history should be questioned if the extremists of black African historians are going to be tainting people with real evidence, such as myself, because I provide proof on my channel, then why should the Eurocentrists, the people who say that blonde people basically rule everything, who get hundreds and thousands of views, who are still write books, and some of them are really famous, why is it that those people don't taint the reputation of the European scholars or the Eurocentric scholars or whatever you want to call them, the Euro-focused scholars? The answer is there's some people who disrespect black people no matter who they are, and they don't want to hear their evidence or their point of view. That's why someone like Sheikh Anta Diop, who is not just an Egyptologist, he didn't just do things in Egypt, why he's considered just a biased man for Africa when he was in other fields that had nothing to do with Africa. This man was a true scholar, and yet he's looked at as a proper biased person.
Especially to random viewers who come here seeking knowledge. These unfortunate people are so shrouded with pseudo-historic, Afrocentric information that they end up very confused and don't even know what to believe anymore.
Again, why does this not apply to all the other false information that's put out there? There's people who say that Egypt was built by aliens, right? That's like a very westernized view by people who try to explain some places. Why don't those people taint things until people don't know what to believe anymore? Why is it us that is these really bad people?
From claiming the history of other cultures to treating the Bible as a black history book.
Let me just state it here and now. The Bible is not a history book, but it holds history from lots of races and lots of people, including black people. There are black people in the Bible. But no, the stories in the Bible do not match actual history as we have seen it.
I'm going to cover the top 5 things that annoy me the most about Afrocentric people. Number 5. Acting as if there's a global conspiracy to hide our history while making up their own truth without any references.
See, here's my problem. Saying that people who are Afrocentrists, and I will prove, by the way, that he will think that I'm an Afrocentrist, but saying that people who are Afrocentrists are just running around trying to prove things with no evidence, again, silly. Sheikh Anta Diop tried to prove evidence. There were some linguists who tried to prove with evidence. There's people who they brought evidence, whether you agree or disagree with their evidence, they brought evidence forward. There's people probably on the internet, the ones you talk about, who don't bring evidence, but that's true for any side. There's a lot of people who will say, hey, the ancient Egyptians were white. You say, prove it. They go, ooh. Saying that there's no references is not true. More than this, there is a system that is trying to hold back Black African history, and it's been trying to do it forever, and it's called Westernization. It's been doing it. The foundation of it has been set. Whether or not they're doing it on purpose anymore, the foundations of it, the roots of it has already been set. That's why it's the Black Savage. That's why you have a channel dedicated to showing African history about the parts that have been largely ignored, as you say. Largely ignored by who? By mistake? And also, it's not only black people's history that's been ignored. I've watched a lot of Doha debates where they talk about how the Middle East has been misconceptioned into being just a bunch of savage Arabs who just wanted to steal people, enslave people, and they had no enlightenments or movements or technological periods or times of grace and times of peace and thinking about other people. And we know this is not true because the Middle East had a bunch of eras and movements and golden ages and bronze ages and dead people and living people and all of this other type of stuff. But if you ask people about the Middle East, a lot of people don't even know that the Middle East founded the the roots of the Renaissance, the roots of the scientific movements. They were referenced multiple times by Europeans who ended up being chiefs of the scientific movements in the West. But people don't know this. The history just starts with, oh, a bunch of white people in, the teen thousands, just all of a sudden came up with some cool ideas after a dark age. And before that dark age, there was a bunch of Greek people who came up with some cool ideas. From who? Nobody. They never got anything from anybody else. You think that's just a mistake?
Don't get me wrong. I know that at one point in history, white people view blacks as inferior and subhuman, and unfortunately, some still do to this day. Back during the days of extreme racism, we weren't even considered human beings, and this was actually used as a justification for enslaving us and treating us as second-class citizens. Even the scientific community did their best to reinforce these beliefs, and archaeologists would literally destroy real and true relics of our history, including ruins, artifacts, and manuscripts.
My comments to this is it wasn't just white people. People from Arabia did that too. I've read many books from the Middle East where they said that the black people were just animals. They basically subscribed to the Hamitic ideas. Not the Hamitic ideas, but the idea that black people spring from Noah and they were hit by the curse. It wasn't just white people who believed that black people were inferior, but this is another Eurocentric idea where things flow from Europe and outwards. And a lot of Europeans find themselves being like, wait a minute, we're not the bad guys only. Yeah, but you guys make yourselves because you make history about you. You make world history about you.
With that being said, this isn't really to say that there aren't aspects of our history that have been destroyed or hidden.
Contradiction number one, he said the history is not hidden, and now he's saying that there's aspects of it that are hidden. By who? By like a global movement to try and make black Africans seem savage? Sounds like you're an Afrocentrist now.
But in this day and age, with equality among all races and access to information literally in the palm of our hands, these things simply don't happen anymore.
Well, everyone relax, kick up your feet, go watch history channels that talk about global history. I'm sure they're going to give equal time to Western history as they're going to give to other forms of history. Or maybe they're not going to do that. Maybe they're actually going to stick to what they've always been doing, which is suppressing other people's history.
One can easily travel to any part of the world, access any information they'd like, and create videos, movies, and documentaries about anything their heart desires.
I have a problem with the word easily there. One can easily just travel around the world. Have you ever heard of something called money or restrictions of travel or fear of going to areas that are the least traveled in the world? Or TVs showing complex or scary images of locations, making certain people not want to go there? You know, that movement. The idea it's easy. It's easy. Just get a plane ticket, fly somewhere around the world, bring your camera, bring your buds, record a video, make documentaries, talk about how Africa is pretty cool, and then you can go home, everybody.
Not only that, but there is simply no proof or evidence that our history is still being deliberately hidden or erased.
For this, all I can say is go to a school right now, anywhere in the world, and then go ask them to give you their curriculum for their history, and then check if there's a lot of African history in there, or maybe even, other forms of history in there. Something that surprised me when I viewed a lot of American podcasts that talk about history is how many people were surprised to find out that states in America and even cities were named after Native Americans, like Dakota and Iowa and Idaho and Mississippi. A lot of people were like, wait, those are named after Native Americans? It's like, how can you not know this? If there's one place in the world that needs to know that their states are named after Native Americans, the people they came and trampled on, it must be America. I mean, I know this information, but that's because I read. And also, don't you think it's strange that people who live in America can name maybe one Native American tribe, but then they can name the Vikings, the Celts, the Gauls, the Greeks, the Romans, the Normans. They can name hundreds of people from Europe, and they can even name specific items that they have. But then when it comes to Native Americans, they're like, they had some stuff and it's pretty cool. Doesn't that strike you as kind of strange? Doesn't that strike you as we still live in a pretty Eurocentrist world where most of the history, even of America, is being directed down a tube of the West? And you can't say, hey, what's the use of studying Native Americans? Okay, what's the use of studying Vikings? Especially when you live in America.
Granted, I do agree that it needs more presence in the media, but there is nothing inherently holding us back from sharing our history, other than ourselves, and making excuses or inventing our history is not going to solve the problem.
Apparently to this guy, changing the world is just a walk in the park for him. I mean, I know he talks about Great Zimbabwe. I'd like to know, since it's so easy to change the minds of so many people in the world, since it's like a walk in the park, I'd like to know if he polled these easy to change minds of people and he asked them, what is a Zimbabwe? And then he asked the same person, who are the Vikings? I'd like to know what the results would come back like.
Number 4. Using the Bible and religion as a tool to validate our history. This one in particular is one of the worst. The main reason being that the Bible and the Christian religion aren't even of African origin. Christianity began in the Middle East and spread throughout Europe and parts of North Africa and Ethiopia.
Even people who believe in religion know that you can't use religion as a history book. But this idea that Christianity started in the Middle East and had nothing to do with North Africa is not true. A lot of early Christians are from North Africa. A lot of them are from the Middle East, and a lot of them are actually from Europe, surprisingly. It's not true that the first Christians were not or had nothing to do with Africa. It's just false. To add to this, the foundations were under the Roman Empire. There's literally Europeans in the text of Jesus. There's Egyptians in the text of Jesus, tax collectors, all these people who are put in place and talked about. Now, you could say whatever race they are, it doesn't matter. I'm talking about they're in the continent of Africa. Mary and Joseph went to Egypt with Jesus as an infant to escape King Herod. There's Africa right there for you.
Our ancestors did not hail from any of those regions. Most American blacks can trace their ancestry from Western and Central Africa, more specifically places like Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Mali, Benin, and Congo.
Well, since we're being so specific, people from America, black people, especially those who come from Ghana, whatever the West African areas, they can trace a lot of their history to outside of Europe because of the white people who took them to goddamn America and fused with the people.
Before European contact, the overwhelming majority of people in these regions practiced their own traditional religions, such as Vodun and Orisha worship, and in some areas they were Islamic. However, none of them were Christian until Europeans arrived.
Christianity existed in Africa hundreds of years before Europeans came. And in West Africa, there were trickles of Christianity that came, mainly due to some people in Central African areas who were Christian themselves from the Sudanese areas. So the idea that Christianity is just foreign until Europeans come, no. This is I have to say it, a Eurocentrist idea. Secondly, anywhere where Islam goes, Christianity travels with, because Islam is a post-Christian religion.
The only part of Africa that was Christian by the time of European arrival was Ethiopia, which are not related to American blacks whatsoever. To make matters worse, Christianity was used as a tool to force slaves to think that they were being saved by white men and to make them into passive subordinates. Sadly, this lingers on to this day, and most blacks are Christian simply because they are raised to be God-fearing, and if they deviate away from this at all, they'll risk burning in hell. So they really believe what they believe simply out of fear of not believing it.
Or they're charmed by the culture, they like the music, they like the art, what it represents, the law and order that it brings, the divination, the feeling, the opening of the feeling of heavens, the idea that you're going to get rewards when you die, the idea that you get rewards now, your prayers, the feeling of feeling safe, the idea of feeling fear, or maybe it's just like, oh, I don't want to go to hell. No, that's simplification of the highest order.
On top of all that, Christianity is a religion. It's not a history book. Sure, the Bible contains some references to historical events, but it is not a textbook. It is a religious manuscript. If you are taking talking snakes and men who walk on water as fact, that's your own choice, and I respect your decision, but you can't expect to force these facts or opinions on anyone. Nor can you use this as a credible source of information to validate our history, especially considering it wasn't even written by Africans.
Since we're talking about Afrocentrists, we do know that some Afrocentrists throw Christianity away, right? And that they want to worship their own religious or religions from Africa. It's not just this whole obsession with Christianity.
Number 3. Acting as though Egypt and Nubia are the only parts of African history worth mentioning. People talk about Egypt a lot in my videos, When people want to reinforce that Africans do have history, regardless if they're black or white, Egypt is usually the only thing they mention. Just because Egypt isn't Africa does not mean that it is part of our history, nor is it the only African history worth mentioning. You have to remember, guys, Africa is a huge continent with over 1 billion people. Looking at Egypt as a source of your history would be no different than a Portuguese man looking at Russian history as his own.
Okay, so here's how we're going to start with this. First of all, West Africans and East Africans, right, as you have showed in your video, our history apparently, they're just as far away from each other as West Africans are from Egypt. So why is it okay for Black Africans to study East African history and be like, oh, look at our history, or South African history and go, oh, look at our history. But then when it comes to North Africans, is it something to do with the color of their skin? Why is it still not our history since it's in our continent? Whether or not they're black, white, blonde with blue eyes, why is it not our history? Also, saying that the people in Europe don't view their history as if it's their history. Sure, in the most ultimate way they don't, but for the most part, they view their history as their history. At least they view it closer to themselves than, like, people from America is a good example. A lot of these people from America, why are they viewing random history in Europe as their history? They don't separate. They don't go, we specifically came from this region and that's my history. They go, oh, I'm European, so my history descends from Europe. And again, every American person probably knows what a Viking is. They know what a Greek is. They know what a Roman is. They know what a goddamn Celtic. They might even know what a Pict is. They know all kinds of names that have nothing to do with quote unquote their history, but there it is laid out for them. And if you want to say, okay, but those are Americans, well, you're addressing Black Americans.
It simply doesn't make any sense. It also serves to reinforce the false belief that Africa south of the Sahara has no history worth mentioning.
So any scholar that just studies Egypt is reinforcing the idea that there are no places in south of the Egyptian area that are. So are you claiming now that anyone who studies, so doesn't that make our point for us? That the multitudes of people who don't study these, or who study Europe and then they stop at just about North Africa and maybe even East Africa, don't they reinforce it? Or is it, or do you have to be black in order to reinforce this idea?
There's this image that Africa outside of Egypt was a land of tribes and villages, when in reality, it was riddled with many civilizations, cities, and kingdoms. Which, by the way, if you would like to see a few examples of this, check out my Cities Built by Africans series, which I'll leave links to at the end of this video.
Unless, of course, you descend from West African slaves, in which case, stick to your own history. Don't you dare look up any history that has nothing to directly to do with your own people who come directly from West Africa, is what he said earlier.
Africa is the second largest landmass in the world, and it boggles my mind how people can be so fixated on Egypt and Nubia to a lesser extent that they totally neglect the rest of the continent. You people need to wake up and do some research on the millions of square miles of land located south of Egypt, which was home to many other unique and impressive ancient civilizations.
I hope the you people that he's referencing there is everybody. You know, everybody in the world needs to wake up to these civilizations since they don't know about them, and it's going to enrich their knowledge. I hope he's not just talking to you people in America.
Number 2. Trying to steal the history of others. Simply put, stop trying to steal history from other people. That is one of the most disgusting things you can possibly do.
I agree with him. Trying to steal other people's cultures is one of the most disgusting things you can do. That's why the Europeans need to return all the artifacts they stole from all over the world. The ones that they literally stole and removed the cultures, and that people from Africa have to fly to literally Europe to go see artifacts, some of the best artifacts that the Africans produced in their history, simply because these people took them around the world.
One big gripe from these extreme Afrocentrists is that the white man stole our history. Well, you know what? You are not doing any better by trying to steal other people's history, are you?
And now he makes the distinction of extreme Afrocentrists. You can't judge a movement by its extremists.
Two wrongs don't make a right. There are many Afrocentric people out there who try to claim that Africans created every major civilization on Earth. Native Americans were copper-toned, straight, black-haired Mongoloids who inhabited the American continents. They grew and developed several different civilizations all throughout these lands, ranging from stone tool-using hunter-gatherer cultures to Bronze Age kingdoms who built cities of stone. They are distinct people with their own unique languages, cultures, traditions, and physical characteristics, none of which equate to Africans. I don't care what Ivan Sertima said in his book. Although interesting, he has no archaeological evidence to back his claims, just theories and observations.
I agree that Native Americans built civilizations, but some of them look like black people. I don't think they were from Africa directly, but some of them were definitely would look like black people today. Even today, there's some of them who have extremely dark skin, they have full lips. I mean, I don't know what mongoloid means. What does the word mongoloid mean? Are you trying to say they had a physical structure similar to that of the Asiatics? Because a lot of Africans have that facial type as well. So saying someone is a mongoloid, I mean, firstly, it's kind of offensive, but then secondly, it's not true that all Negroids have a face similar to that of every West African or this West African phenotype or whatever. A lot of them would qualify in this group called mongoloid, even though I would never use, that's not, okay.
Statues and dolls that have curly hair do not automatically mean that the civilization has African origins. Then there are the dark-skinned peoples in other parts of the world, such as Australian Aboriginals and Polynesians, who people claim were of African descent. Newsflash, these features can all be explained by climate. It is common knowledge that hot and tropical areas with more sun generally have darker-skinned people, a genetic adaptation to protect their bodies from harmful UV rays. This is why Australia has the highest rate of skin cancer in the world. Its native people are dark-skinned, whereas its conquerors are fair-skinned. Genetically, culturally, and linguistically, natives of these regions are more similar to Southeast Asians than Africans. And just because their skin is the same color as ours does not mean we are the same people. If that logic made any sense, then that would mean that Latinos and Arabs are related just because they have similar features.
Well, the argument you just made is why we believe that there's no such thing as races, and that someone from East Africa could be more related to someone of, like, the Middle East, but then they wouldn't be called a whatever, because race is a fluid thing which is made up. And you've just proven that by saying that there's certain people who would fit a certain race. So you just debunked race. So what does this not our people thing mean? If there's no such thing as race, right? And you can't just judge people by the way they look, and the DNA is whatever, then what does the Austronesians aren't our people mean?
In extreme cases, some Afrocentric people even try to take credit for every single major civilization, from Chinese to Romans, from Aztecs to Inca, from Egyptians to Persians. They try to claim that black people brought civilization to the entire world. If any of this stuff at all were true, from Native Americans being black to blacks being the fathers of all world civilization, the evidence should be slapping us in the face.
But you said it, it's the most extreme cases. In the not so extreme, but extreme cases in Europe, there's people who claim that the Europeans brought civilizations to every culture in the world. I mean, if we want to judge extreme cases, what about the people who say aliens brought civilizations to Earth? You want to judge extreme cases? What about the people who say gods brought the world civilizations? I mean, extreme cases are extreme cases, and those people are kind of, they've got their own agendas, and that's fine.
Proud of your own history and do some research before sweeping it under the rug and trying to claim someone else's as your own.
Let me think about that. No.
maybe I can be proud of other people's history as well if I find it very intriguing. And I'll claim it as my own because any human history is my history because I am a human. So, yes, the ancient Egyptians is my history, not only just because I'm human, but because it happened in the continent of Africa with people who bleed like other Africans, who looked like other Africans. I said earlier that this guy would consider me an Afrocentrist, and that's because he believes that if you believe that the ancient Egyptians were black, then you're an Afrocentrist.
Number 1. Fighting racism with racism. People who do any and everything they can to prove that white people are evil, primitive, barbaric, or uncivilized, and that we somehow saved them from their lives of savagery. Remember what I said about 2 wrongs don't make a right? Just like stealing history from others is wrong, racism is also wrong. Being a victim of it does not justify doing it to others. However, when it comes to these bigoted people, their primary agenda is to spread hatred towards whites and prove to the world that they are terrible human beings or monstrous entities. Sure, whites don't have the best track record when it comes to racism, genocide, or conquest, and in fact, they're probably responsible for the most mass deaths in all of human history. However, it wasn't their skin that did any of that. It was their civilizations and their cultures. It wasn't some collective 100% anti-colored, all-white effort that did it. Every human being is unique, and it's okay to hate the racists, but don't hate the race. If I meet a racist white guy, I have just as little respect for him as I would for you if you behave that way towards his race. I love all human beings on an individual basis, and until that individual loses my respect, he or she will continue to be loved by me regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, or nationality. If you believe that someone is inherently inferior to you in any way strictly due to their skin color, then you're an idiot, plain and simple. Oh, and I know this is supposed to be a top 5, but I'm gonna add in another little bonus clip for you guys. Arguably one of the most confusing and infuriating things I've had to deal with since the birth of this channel is the people, not just black people, but whites too, but mostly black people, who are so fixated on the fact that I sound like a white boy that they completely ignore my content, completely ignore everything in the video, because all they can think about is the fact that I talked like a white person. So anyway, if you fit into this category at all, I got a few words for you. Hey yo, yeah, YouTube, it's your boy Jabari here. I'm back at it again with another video for y'all. And no. See, that's what y'all don't get. That's not me. Just because I don't talk that way doesn't mean I'm not black. Okay? I talk the way I talk because speaking proper English is something that makes me feel comfortable. And what makes me feel comfortable is completely irrelevant to what you think I should sound like or what you think I should talk like. So here you go, idiots. Here I am, in the flesh. Are you satisfied? It's people like you who hold our race back, conforming to some stupid stereotypes and stupid social norms and ignoring your own individuality, walking, talking, and acting like idiots just to impress people and be accepted as a black person. What y'all need to do is wake up, grow up, and help your people instead of criticizing them for expressing their individuality.
I'll be honest, all Americans to Africans sound like white people. I probably sound like a white person to Americans, but I want Americans to know that all people, if you don't speak African languages, you sound like a white person to us. But I will say to this guy that, yeah, I sympathize with him. Nobody should call you stupid names just because you have your own way of speaking. But don't say that people are speaking stupid just because they speak in a completely different accent. And don't say they're not speaking proper English. There's different dialects of English, and the Black American dialect is still a proper way of speaking. It might not be the one used in academia, but it's still a proper way of speaking. Language is about understanding the other person who you're communicating to. It's not about setting up curriculums and forcing everyone to talk the same way. That's how you destroy cultures. You know, that thing we were talking about earlier, that's Eurocentric. that forces people down one funnel and ignores other histories that they've built. Do not destroy the history that was built by black people in the way they speak. It should be documented and written down. Anthropologically, it's still real and part of their history.
So there you have it, guys. It's me, the white boy, in the flesh. It's the first you've seen of me, but it certainly won't be the last.